Hi, everyone. Welcome to this month's LECSTalk. As you can see, our speaker is Michael Katz, who is a research astrophysicist at NASA Marshall Space Flight Center, and he's going to give us an overview on his research, more precisely on LISA data analysis codes and techniques. Michael, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So first of all, yeah, thanks for the Lex chairs for inviting me to give this talk. I used to be a Lex chair, so I care very deeply about these types of forums and this type of interaction with our early career scientist group in LISA. So very happy to be doing this. I'm trying to turn on my video, and it doesn't look like my camera's going on. So I guess I apologize about that, but we'll see if I can get it turned on. But it just like I'm clicking in, it's just not going anywhere. We'll see if that fixes, but I guess for now I'll just do without the video. So what I'm going to talk about today is an introduction to LISA data analysis and the LISA global fit. But I want to be very clear on something. When I was thinking about what to talk about for this session, I was deciding basically, there's so many things to talk about here. It ranges across so many different areas, so many different source types, many different things, and there's just no way you can fit that into an hour. So what I decided to do ultimately was to focus a bit more on the status of everything around the LISA global fit and LISA data analysis, because I think as of now, as I will mention, the tools are out there for LISA early career scientists and LISA folks in general to learn about the details and the techniques that are actually being used in all of these things, like computing signal to noise ratios, computing likelihoods, running sampling operations, different things that we'll get into. There are tools available for people to learn about that. So rather than going into detail on that end, kind of talking about the math, talking about kind of the intricacy of how we solve the global fit solution, I think for a group of early career scientists in LISA, one of the most important things to know about is what the status of the global fit is in terms of actually building it, actually, making it a real life usable thing, and where we are at on that path, so that as an early career scientist, where there is work that needs to be done, what types of conversations are being had around this area, and to help fill in kind of general knowledge about how we are building this up. Because I really think you can go look at papers, you can go look at the codes that I'll reference and the tutorials involved in there. And what you'll find is, this is how you do a likelihood. The likelihood is, effectively an inner product, and this is the math to do that. So we're not going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about something that's probably a bit more bland. I don't have a lot of pretty pictures and whatnot, but I think the information is essential to anyone who's trying to understand what's going on around LISA data analysis and to try to have an impact, or at least an understanding of what can be done in these areas. So go to the next slide. So to begin, I'm going to start with the LISA global fit kind of in general at a high level. And then I'm going to kind of break it down by source type, because in the end, our global fit, really, its kind of main running piece is these individual source modules. So we'll talk about that in a bit. But for right now, I'm going to focus on just the LISA global fit in general. So on the left side, I hope all of you are familiar with this figure or some version of this figure. This type of thing has appeared in a variety of LISA documents now over the years. This one is from the Red Book, from the Mission Definition Report. And I'm just going to use this really quick to illustrate the different pieces of the global fit. But keep in mind, we're looking at this in the frequency domain. All of these signals are going to overlap in both time and frequency. These are the main sources that we care about, but this is not inclusive of everything that we'll look at. But this is going to represent the main things that we'll talk about today. So we're going to talk about, can you see my mouse? Okay.
Yes.
We're going to talk about the massive black holes to start. These are these tracks up in the upper left. talk about the galaxy made up of the large number of binaries here in the center. I'll talk about stellar origin black holes, extreme mass ratio in spirals, and we will also talk a bit about stochastic foregrounds and the noise analysis. The idea of the global fit is that since we have all of these things in the data stream all at one time, they're overlapping. A lot of things are, like I said, are overlapping in time and frequency, but each of these sources really do have a differing set of characteristics that does affect their waveform and does affect how we do the analysis. So to kind of think about this a bit and why the global fit is so hard, you can look at the last point on the bottom there, which is the high dimensionality of this problem. If you take the astrophysical rates, predictions, and whatnot, which we won't go into detail here, but if you take, the generally accepted regular predictions, we're looking at a fit that has to examine and characterize on the order of 100,000 parameters. And that is difficult in almost any case, even if you had the simplest analytic likelihood functions, which we do not. So the big idea of the LISA global fit is, how do we attack this problem in a statistically consistent way while also understanding that there is a numerical and human cost to building this and running this, and we have to be realistic with our limits. The fact is, we could, for anyone that's familiar with Markov chain Monte Carlo and MCMC, which is kind of the basis of all of these codes, we could run those things forever, right? In MCMC, the idea is that if you could run to time equals infinity, you would converge to the right answer. If we could just simply put this together and run it without ever thinking about resources or how long it would take to run, this would be a straightforward thing to set up, but it would just never, ever finish. It would just never make it there in our lifetimes. And so the big big steps we've taken to make this happen both occur on the theoretical side, how we're thinking about these things statistically, the waveforms, all that, but also on the implementation side, because the fact is we will not run this unless we are smart about the implementation. So on the top right there, you kind of see what we refer to as the global fit wheel. You see the various sources that we will talk about today. The ones that are outlined in a black outline are things that are included in the current global fits that I'll touch on in a second. It doesn't mean those modules are finished by any means, but they are included. But this is kind of how we imagine the global fit going from a schematic view, is we're kind of going to cycle through our different sources and update parameters along the way, and also exchange information about the instrument, the noise, and any calibration that we have to do. And just kind of a last note on this slide, one thing that's very important here, both to the theoretical concept, but also the numerical implementation and the algorithmic implementation, is the idea of modularity. Everything that we build for the LISA global fit has to be modular. And I will get into a lot of that near the end in terms of actual implementation and some code things that I want to show. But I just really want to harp on this because in my mind, the best way to maximize our LISA science capabilities are to make this very, very large and complex algorithm as modular as possible, meaning as easy as we can to switch in and out pieces, small and large. And we'll get into why that's important, and we'll talk about kind of some of the ways that I'm thinking about that these days. Before I go on, let me also just say, please ask questions as we go along. Speak up, raise your hand, whatever you want to do. I much prefer this to be a two-way type conversation than a one-way. And like I said, a lot of the information is going to be kind of bland. It's separated into categories to try and make the information just clear. So while we're talking about different sources, ask questions while those are up, because we're just going to go to a different source type next. So just please feel free to speak up as anything comes to mind. Now, the current status of the global fit, and I'll figure out how to share my slides around or something, because I made all these links, clickable. I'm going to talk about the LESA global fit status at a very, very high level, but I gave a plenary talk at the LESA symposium on this that I think is more focused on the status of like actual global fit implementations. I'm not going to get into that today because I think you can just go watch the video of the symposium. I posted it there. But the kind of large scale status is we have 4 global fit algorithms, I would say, that I know of. I think Stefan, I saw you on this call and I realized I spelled your last name wrong, and I really apologize for that. I think I have that wrong. I apologize. I have an extra A in there. Shouldn't be there. So that's Strub is STRUB in case you look it up. Sorry, Stefan. So there are 4 algorithms. 2 of them have been published in Physical Review D. The algorithm that I've been working on is effectively about to be accepted, but you can click the archive link there. There's a 4th algorithm that's being led by Senwen Dang and Stas Vivek and Sylvain Marsat and folks from kind of a French contingent. My understanding is that this is forthcoming. So hopefully that will be out soon, and we'll have all 4 papers. You can really start doing kind of large scale understanding of the differences and similarities and whatnot. There are lots of small, medium, and large projects to do around the global fit. And I can't emphasize that enough. If you're looking for projects, if you're working with, undergrad students or anything, there are a variety of projects that range in complexity and difficulty, but there really are just a lot of things that we need to do, even things that are checks that we need to do in order to be confident about the algorithm that we're building. And I would say I'm kind of on an active collaboration spree, trying to, find anyone that has time. Right. I know a lot of people want to work on things. Things are very interesting, but everyone is very busy right now and just looking to, let people know that if you're looking for projects, I can definitely help brainstorm some. I would be more than happy to do that. And finally, the global fit outputs that we have so far, at least, are available for the astrophysics community to work with. Once again, you can kind of see the plenary talk a little bit about that and some of the kind of codes that are referenced in it. But I just want to be clear about that, because not only do we have to build this algorithm, but we have to know that our outputs from this algorithm are also in line with what the astrophysics community both needs and, can use to be certain that they can accomplish the science that they want to. And I guess this does, generally extend beyond the astrophysics community to the, fundamental physics and cosmology communities. But there are lots of things to be done here. Building diagnostics for the success of these fits, building diagnostics for further down the line in the astrophysical tests. There are just tons and tons and tons of work to be done here. And, the idea is that with launch coming in roughly 10 years, by the time launch happens, we really want to be confident that we have a handle on all of these things so that we can really maximize our success of the mission in terms of time domain astronomy with, transient sources and things like that. But in order to do that, because everything in LESA is tied together, we have to really understand this entire fit to maximize our ability to work on the fly during the mission. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through basically every source type, and I'm going to give you a rundown of where they're at. Before I do that, I want to be very clear. On the right here are 2 links I put here. This is the LESA Analysis Tools workshop. This workshop I did in April, I think, early May maybe, that goes through a lot of the codes that I've worked on with various sets of collaborators. This is the data generation analysis workshop that was done recently by folks kind of associated with the LDC and the simulation working group. I want to be very clear about this. I think that the fact that these tools are now here and been at least put through an initial version that has been, open source and output to the public, this is an unbelievably great place to start to understand LESA data analysis, to work with the things that we work with, to think about things that we think about in a hands-on capacity instead of, in a talk where you're just listening to it. You want to go work with codes. You want to go start to actually look at this. If you start with these tutorials and you work through them, this is a great gauge of where you're at, the types of knowledge that, the breadth of knowledge that we're trying to get across here. And this is kind of something, whenever I start working with students now, I'll always point them towards this. I want to be very clear also, these things aren't necessarily easy. LISA analysis is complicated. Part of the idea with those tools is to start with the easy and build up. But the fact is that, when you want to contribute to these types of analyses in a research capacity, it is not easy. And so the idea of these tools is to get you, very close to the point where you can do research level work. And so it's a great place to start and to work through in your, initially looking through LISA analysis basics and things like that. Now, for every type of module, every type of source that goes in the global fit, it's going to have what I would consider kind of a 5-step process at a large scale. Okay. The first step is waveform design, or in terms of noise, model design, implementation, optimization at the level where you can do simplified diagnostic computations, signal to noise ratios, likelihoods, different things like that, where you can calculate information matrix predictions. Those kind of things are in this first step. Once we have that in place, which basically means we have some model that has been optimized for data analysis, we then work on a single source analysis, meaning it's the only thing in the data stream. It could have noise, maybe not have noise, what have you, but the point is to put one source in the data, find it without any knowledge of what's in there, characterize it, and output its posterior information, the outputs of what we want from data analysis. So this is the second step, making sure you can complete that with just one source alone. The next step is to work on a single source type. I guess I should have another hyphen there. A single source type module implementation. So this means, whereas single source analysis is like one massive black hole, single source type is all massive black holes, or all massive black holes that are in the population you're using, or even at a start, 2, 3 massive black holes, just to make sure that whatever the pipeline is that you're writing, not going to get confused. It's not going to get messed up when you add more. You have to do this kind of in the next level of isolation, which is on its own without having to interact with anything else, maybe just noise. But that's the third step. Once you have accomplished the third step, where you're now running, say you've injected a population of massive black holes and you can find them, fit them, and characterize them, you then move to the fourth step, which is a full global fit run. And here what full means is, full can vary from time to time, but really what full means is just more than one source type, more than the single source module that you're using, making sure that as things go around that wheel that we saw on the earlier slide, that it doesn't cause any problems between the sources. Generally speaking, certain sources will have very low expectation of correlation or overlap. Things like emeries and massive black holes, probably very easy to decipher between those and not have many issues. Probably true of galactic binaries in the most part, but maybe you might get some confusion with low signal to noise ratio binaries with other sources. So this is not me just trying to say anything specific, more me just trying to say these are the types of things you want to think about. You have to investigate as we build up this whole thing. And then the final step is just building catalogs, building outputs that are actually usable. So the full global fit run will put out a set of data that can be usable in some form maybe, but really what we need to do is curate that for the astrophysics, fundamental physics, cosmology communities to use as they need to do their science. I'm going to use this stoplight system, green, yellow, red. Green means we have an initial implementation complete. It does not mean that work is done. It just means that the structure we put in, the way that we're running it, the outputs we're seeing, we consider it a success, and we think if we build off of this, we'll be good to go. Yellow means that an implementation is either kind of in its initial progress state, or I forecast or believe there will be significant challenges ahead in terms of implementation issues, adding more realism, different things like that, I will categorize those as yellow. And red means that as far as I know, there hasn't been any work started on these yet, or at least any published work. I will just also say the caveat, I try to stay up on recent things. Obviously, this is not meant to be entirely complete, but just kind of an initial look at it. And so for each source, do you have any questions on this before I actually get into the sources? Because now I'm going to go literally source by source in terms of giving a status of where the global fit is and what we need to do and whatnot. So is there any questions now before I go forward? Okay. Doesn't seem like it. Okay. I will keep going then. So for each source type, you're going to see 4 boxes. The left side is the status, exactly what we talked about on the last slide. The right side is what I kind of listed off as what I think are important needs. This can be waveform related things. This can be implementation related things, likelihood related things. You'll see there'll be a large variety there depending on the source. The middle will have tools, and this is not meant to be an exhaustive list, but tools that I know that either people are using to do these types of analyses or that I know can be used for these types of analyses, and links to them here. And then the bottom box will have 4 or 5 papers that are recent additions to literature, or maybe things that are just really important recent things for the category that we'll talk about. But once again, it's not meant to be an exhaustive list or specifically reviews or anything. But if you go to the papers that I put on each slide and you start there, you look at citations, references, whatever, then if you start here, this is a good place to start to help build out your knowledge of the area and whatnot. So this is what for all of the next set of slides I'm going to show, this is going to be exactly how they will go. And when I send these slides around, these are clickable links that you can look at and can use. Okay, so to start with the massive black holes, the status on the massive black holes is that everything is green. Just because there's a lot to talk about, I won't rehash everything and why it's green necessarily, but we have all these in place. We're confident we can start moving forward with the analyses that we have in the global fits right now. We've done everything on that list, I would say. The main important needs in the massive black hole area are more accurate waveforms for high signal to noise ratio. I know this is something that the numerical relativity and cell force communities and whatnot are all working on to try and accomplish for LISA. That's something that will be really important to our success. We will also need to add any astrophysics. I honestly am not entirely aware of how needed that is, like in terms of any type of accretion effects, like gas drag or other things, at least for the massive black holes. But I'm basically just saying here, if there's anything that we need to include in the massive black holes, we need to do that for LISA because we don't have that yet. We do have some fast likelihood functions for massive black holes, specifically built kind of around heterodyned likelihoods. You can look at the various tools that are there in the papers that are referenced and whatnot. That's where you can find heterodyning information, just kind of a fast way to do likelihood. But we do need to update that for higher modes and precession. We need to kind of look at these likelihood implementations when the waveforms become a little bit more complex. We need to examine what we will need to do for low signal to noise ratio sources. So that's both from an astrophysical perspective, how much we expect them to be there, but also, once again, we can make all the predictions that we want. We're going to turn on LISA, and LISA is going to show us what the universe has in store. And so, we have to be prepared for many possibilities, but especially anything that can be really, really interesting to science. And I would say generally low signal to noise, massive black holes that are, potentially very far out in the universe would be very, very interesting. And I'm not entirely confident yet that at low signal to noise ratio, especially at detectability thresholds, we can categorize that properly in our global fit algorithms. And also, at some point we may have sources that are on the threshold of detectability, which means we need to categorize, their evidence and things like that. And so we need to examine all these possibilities because they will have an effect on our downstream science. Low latency and synergy with EM measurements is a very important thing for massive black holes. There are definitely people who have some low latency pipelines. I don't think I'm particularly worried about like the general concept of the low latency work. I think have shown that can be done, but I think we need to get more into implementations and testing. Even though we have a lot of time until the mission, we really need to have this in place early on because this involves a lot more than just LISA, especially communicating with EM partners and all of that stuff. And finally, on massive black holes, I think we need to do a bit of a deep check of the response function at high SNR. We have some approximate response functions that are accurate in certain limits. I think that it's possible that they will extend to a generic case where it will be okay. But this is something we need to test because massive black holes will have the possibility of having high SNRs of high hundreds, even in the thousands. And so we need to be very sure that any type of approximation we make to the response doesn't actually affect our results and add any systematic errors to the process. Once again, because I'll just be skipping through sources here, I'll take a second. Does anyone have any questions about massive black holes?
Actually, I have one, if no one else wants to speak up.
Yep.
I was curious about these astrophysics needs. Are you going to maybe contact the astrophysics working group, for example, and ask them exactly what they need in order to actually implement their needs in the codes? Or how do you plan on actually working on these needs?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I would say that most of my point of view here is coming from the data analysis side. I know that the astrophysicists are thinking about this. I know that the waveform modelers are thinking about this. Things like, if we'll need to include eccentricity in massive black hole waveforms because of astrophysical effects and how that will evolve as it gets towards merger. I know that they're thinking about that. I think my point here is, we just have to keep that in mind and always be ready to move these new waveforms in as we get them and make sure that they still work with whatever we're working with, right? If we end up having to add eccentricity, even low eccentricity, it may cause some confusion for various things. So we have to be we just have to be careful because they're so high SNR. We have to be very particular from the data analysis side. And that's, I guess I'm kind of saying that once the waveform modelers and astrophysicists have done their part and handed us off, what they think needs to be in our data analysis algorithm, right? Like as a data analyst, it's obviously important to know what's going in, but we can all only do so much. So we depend on the astrophysicists and the waveform modelers to tell us what we need more. And for us, that really just comes down to bridging any implementation details. A lot of times we'll get a waveform that's perfectly usable, accurate, all those things. Sometimes we'll have to adjust it to make sure it's fast enough for whatever for our purposes. So this is kind of what I just mean, is thinking about those kind of things from the data analysis side. But that's a good question. I think I saw Vivian. I don't know if you still have a question, but I saw you put your hand.
No. I was sorry. It got answered more or less, but I just wanted to say that we were totally discussing this during the astrophysics working group meeting. That we wanted to talk more, basically.
Yeah.
With the data now.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think as we are building out our data analysis capabilities and making things more open source and streamlined and whatnot, I think that's going to be easier. So, but that I'm glad you guys are thinking about that. That's how we should be doing this. Have to compartmentalize. It's too much for any one person or any even single group to do. Any other questions on massive black holes before we go forward? Okay, we can always come back, at the end if anyone has questions. But All right, next up is the galaxy. By the galaxy here, I mean ultra compact binaries, mostly white dwarf binaries, but I suppose especially in the future, we'll need to make sure that we have the neutron star binaries and stellar origin binaries a little bit in there, but we'll talk about those in a bit. Once again, status here is all green. There are definitely improvements to be made around this algorithm. There's no question about that. But we have an initial implementation, gone through all these steps, and I think that we're confident that as long as we work kind of in this image, we will be okay in the end. The important needs for some of the work in the galaxy, once again, it's astrophysics in the waveforms and global fitting. This one I think is a little bit more, it's a little different than the astrophysics part in the massive black holes, because the massive black holes, we won't, it guess depends on the detection counts, but we're talking about, order maybe 100 or hundreds of massive black holes over the lifetime of LISA if we're lucky, maybe even tens in cases. In the galaxy, we're talking about, upwards of 10,000 plus individually resolvable sources. And so when we talk about astrophysics, it's not only just like, is this possible? It's, a lot of times because it's something that's in our galaxy, we think it is possible. And we need to make sure that we're equipped to handle it because as my colleague Tyson Lindenberg likes to say, in the global fit, if you have something, going slightly wrong 1% of the time, that's on 100 sources. So it's, anything that's a small issue in the global fit for the galaxy, will have an effect. It's not going to be one source or something we can shove away. It's going to, affect a group of sources that will affect our results. So the astrophysics here, an example of these are like using triple systems, eccentricity, accretion, direct impact accretion types of things where you have interacting sources. So these types of things we have to think about in the global fit, think about their waveforms. Once we have the waveforms, we have to think about how they will go into the global fit and what this, I don't want to get into too much detail because it gets complex. There are papers out there that discuss this. But the main idea here is some astrophysics will make a very strong impact on the waveform, something that will be very clearly different than a binary that is just governed by general relativity. And some astrophysics will not have such a strong effect. Some astrophysics will have a very small effect, but maybe non-negligible. And it's actually those sources that are the hardest ones to deal with in a global fitting capacity, because within the global fit, you have to categorize how likely each of these things are, and they may depend on these really high dimensional interactions with other sources around them and stuff like that. So it's very complex. We can get into that more of that if people have questions, but there's some papers out there I can point you to for that. We need improvements in our transdimensional sampling methods. I think we have good transdimensional sampling methods, but we definitely need to look at them and improve them. And this is also where the astrophysics things come in. We need to look at other sources, the interaction with other sources, meaning, I want, when I was designing the algorithm that I mainly worked on, just as an example, I accidentally hit a minus sign in the wrong place for a massive black hole waveform. And in the end, basically, it was swallowed up by like a couple thousand galactic binaries that were meaningless. They just latched on to a little piece of the massive black hole signal. So these kind of things we have to be concerned about. We just have to check them. That's part of this fourth step here of the full global fit. We need to make sure that as things get added in, the binaries don't soak up SNR or something where they shouldn't, and we have to just make sure that we're careful about that. We need catalog diagnostics. Like, we've given you a catalog. We need to figure out how to put diagnostic computations to that catalog to say how good it is compared to the injection, or how, our confidence about it if we pretend like we don't know the injection, like it will be in real life. So this is definitely a big area of discussion, I think, and is something that I know that the folks in Nice are thinking a lot about and whatnot. And finally, I think, there is a lot of EM interaction stuff to discuss here. how we will combine the gravitational wave information with the various EM information that we have, how to go back and forth from EM to GW and from GW to EM observations, and how many EM observations we can make based on gravitational wave observations. So I think all of these things are things that still need to be done. There's a lot to do, but I think it is also comforting that I really do think each of these things, I can color them green, and something that we are successful doing. Any questions on this before I go to MREs that I think are next? Okay. MREs, you'll see now we are no longer in all green territory. The data analysis waveforms, I think, are there for MREs. We still need to work on them, but I think in general, we are confident that the structure that we built will get us to the end of the line, which is fully generic waveforms in curved backgrounds and whatnot. For single source analysis, I'd say that we're fairly confident about doing parameter estimation and characterization once we have found an MRE. But right now, the outstanding issue in the MRE global fitting problem is the search, the single source search. And that's, as you can see, a poor need on the right. That is why this is yellow. I think once we complete the single source search, and we are confident that when we put that algorithm against any injected MRE that it can find it, then this will be turned green. But we're not there yet. It's a major outstanding area of research. It is not an easy problem to solve. There are a few groups thinking about it, but we need more people to think about it and more options to just make sure that we are successful. I'm not going to go into any of the bottom there because you see they're all red. We are far away from doing any of those things, I would say, but at least starting to maybe think about them. But I would not categorize any of those things as in progress. Some things, important needs I think we need to think about. Waveform improvements, like I said, but I think we're on the way to that. That's kind of more of just making sure everything slots in and works right. The single source search, like I said before, that's definitely our biggest outstanding issue. I think we may have more clarity on MRE rates from these QPE sources, or what I hope I have that name right. But as for right now, the MRE rates are very uncertain and have a very wide range. And if they stay that way, we really need to make sure that we have capabilities if there really is like a very large number of MREs, which is a possibility. And that's something that I think from a numerical or like computational standpoint can be very difficult. We really have to make sure we have that capability if we think we need it. We need to include resonances in waveforms and data analysis. That is something, to be clear here, the waveform people are working on. But I'm thinking about this once again more from a data analysis side. If people use something like phenomenological waveforms, analytical waveforms for something like a search technique that will make it go faster, we need to make sure that once resonances are put into the real injections, the real waveforms that we will see in real life, we need to make sure that our search algorithms will indeed find those. And then finally, I think one big thing with MREs that we are working on, have some ideas about, but are decently removed from, is really fast enhanced likelihoods for MREs, really faster specialized likelihoods for MREs as well. So I think we're working towards that, but definitely not there yet, and still kind of looking at likelihoods that are in the tens to hundreds of milliseconds on GPUs, and we need to improve that really to have a better chance of doing all of this. Anyone have any questions on MREs before I go to the next one? Oh, okay. Also, just want to check what time it is. Okay, next one is stellar origin black hole binaries. These are very similar in nature to the galactic binaries, the galaxy themselves, just because of the slow nature of their evolution. But with the higher masses, we do have these sources kind of separated out. They do have to be dealt with a little bit of a different way. The And these can be, progenitor sources for LIGO and things like that. I'll talk about that in a second, the important needs. The status here is, I think we have the waveforms. Once again, this type of thing that will kind of come in from the waveform people, but especially at these far separations, I think the waveforms will be fine. Maybe we just need to have eccentricity in there, which could make that difficult. But, I think ultimately I'm confident that the waveforms will be there. The single source analysis, like the Emery's, we haven't really successfully done a search yet. I shouldn't say that. I think at least a group out of Birmingham. Sorry, I said that like the Alabama way of saying Birmingham. The Birmingham in England, I think, is there's a paper from that group that has a single source search for a stellar origin black hole with some quotes on how low an SNR that they can get. So I think that's pretty cool, pretty interesting. I think that's one of the papers I have listed here. But I still have it colored as yellow, just until we have maybe like, one more algorithm that does it, and we can kind of compare and make sure that everything is going well. But this one is approaching green from the single source analysis spot, but still definitely red for anything further down the line. Important needs here: search, eccentricity, understanding of pre and post triggers, interactions between the ground-based observing bands and the LISA band, in terms of letting ground-based bands know there will be a merger if we can pull that off, and we get lucky with sources being the right distance and all of that stuff, and eventually looking back with ground-based data into the LISA data stream to potentially look for kind of a lower SNR source or something in there. Those types of things. People have written about those. People have looked at that, but all these things need to be moved more into implementation form in the coming years. We do need response improvements. Like I said, they're kind of like galactic sources in terms of how quickly they evolve, but they do evolve. They do have the capability of evolving a lot more, especially at higher frequencies. We need to think about response improvements here. I think the response we're using right now, I think, is kind of not well suited for this turnover region. So we need to work on that. And I also think, as you look at kind of some of the models of the least sensitivity over the years that have gone up and down, slight differences in the high frequency sensitivity can really affect all of these things on the status list and the important needs list. And so kind of understanding that and making sure that we are ready to, the instrumentalists come back to us and they say, this is our new updated, best estimate of our sensitivity. Can you check things? Can you do things? Whatever we start to use that, we're going to need to make sure that these types of sources, what we do for the SOBBHs, will work, and understand what we will gain and lose as that frequency goes up and down, because it's very sensitive right in that area where those stellar origin black holes are observable. Any other questions here before I go to the next one? Once again, I know I apologize if this is a little bland. I'm like really just trying to give a very wide overview of like actually the work being done, so that I think that's so people are more aware of that. Okay, no questions. I'll go to the next one. This is for stochastic signals, but here I'm specifically talking about stochastic signals emanating from the galaxy, meaning from ultra-compact binary sources. They're all green, except there is kind of a slight hiccup in the data analysis waveforms part, where I'll talk about that more when I get to the important needs. That's kind of a nuance about some specific populations of sources and whatnot. But I want to be clear here that I think as we update the waveform part, kind of the model, I should really say, for a stochastic signal, I think it will flow down to the next set of steps. Like, I don't think that the new analysis waveforms will affect the rest of the steps. I think they'll just plug right in. And so that's why I've kept the further ones green. And thanks to Robbie Rosati, who helped me put together this slide, helped me think through that and we agreed it should be yellow there for the data analysis waveforms. The important needs here are there's some real nuance in these stochastic signals from the galaxy. Generally speaking, we represent them, especially when we're doing sensitivity calculations, signal to noise ratio calculations, and not doing a real data analysis run. We tend to think about these things as smooth, as some type of functional analytic form. And we're really seeing that as we fit the global fit, as we work through our outputs and start to understand what we're seeing there, there's a really good chance that the foreground signal from the ultra compact binaries in the galaxy is not smooth, and that is definitely true when it comes to some populations like the cataclysmic variables. There's a recent paper from, I forgot folks, I know Katie Brevik, I think Tyson Lindbergh was on it, I forgot who was the first author. That one talks about a potential background from cataclysmic variables that are at specific frequencies. So this potential non-smoothness is something we really need to think about and work through and understand, how that will affect our reality and our results. That goes along with the second point, including all contributing populations. Right now, we do estimate a lot of our global fit results from an iterative approach. And what I mean by that is getting a stochastic signal out of a population of single sources is inherently a global fitting problem. You need to fit for the sources and the stochastic model simultaneously in order to get the actual right result. We try to simulate this to make predictions by doing iterative approaches. As far as I can tell, I think they work well. And there have been some suggestions to some of these approaches for how to add in some computations that can actually make them more accurate and more have a higher fidelity to the global fit outputs. But this is something I think we need to work with and just check and just make sure that we're getting the best kind of accurate predictions we can from any type of simpler analysis before we get into the global fit complexity. We need to include time dependence in the analysis. Tyson Lindbergh is doing some work on this with wavelet domain type of work. There are other people thinking about similar kinds of things that have been published in some papers recently. Same with Robbie. I know some folks that I think originate in Birmingham and some in Italy, I think, are working on that. So that's an interesting piece of this is the time dependence part. And then looking at statistics of stochastic signals, I think that we still need to kind of clear that up a little bit. And Robbie and I talked through that a bit yesterday. And it's definitely something that we need to understand a bit more in terms of how to, categorize stochastic signals and how to categorize its interaction with other possible things that are left in a residual data stream if they're improperly subtracted and things like that. I'll go to the next one just because it's very similar, and then I'll stop for questions after this. Other stochastic signals. This is really things that are more outside the galaxy. Something that's not always predicted by a strict set of sources, but something like cosmological or maybe an astrophysical background from EMRIs or something like that. For these signals, we have not done any full global fitting and have no catalog outputs. That's the difference from the last slide. But we have, it's kind of in a similar state with the data analysis waveforms. The single source analysis is done. If you put one of these backgrounds in a data stream by itself, we can pretty much extract them, I think, with confidence. And we've started to think about how these fit into the kind of source level modules. But we're in progress on that and haven't gone further than that. Important needs here, and these are mainly from Robbie. So if anyone has serious questions on these, I might point them to Robbie if Robbie's on the call. We need to go from theoretical models of cosmology to gravitational wave signals or like stochastic signal predictions. We need to look at the interplay with global fit and residual accuracy. That's something that Robbie talks a lot about, I think, in his recent paper. Look at time and spatial dependence. There's also a recent paper from a few folks out of, I think, Vanderbilt, Minnesota, that look at anisotropic backgrounds and whatnot. So that's where we have to look at the time and spatial dependence. Can we do this in a non-parametric way? There's some, once again, similar to last slide, there's a trade-off in terms of how smooth things are, and our ability to actually constrain things, and to understand then bias and upper limit studies on these different types of backgrounds, and how to understand how to use the upper limits we can get for science and whatnot. Any questions on that before I go to the last category of updates, which is noise? Any questions on the backgrounds, foregrounds? Okay. The noise one I'll talk about very briefly, because this is one, as you'll see, it's all yellow. I put it all yellow because the fact is we do actually have an instance of this going through the entire pipeline here in our current global fit outputs, but it's in a stationary and Gaussian noise, which is not realistic at all for LISA. And so because I think that there are a very large number of unknowns for noise analysis, how we'll do it, how to parameterize things, all of that stuff, I've categorized every single part of this as yellow. I think that's the right way to look at it, because I think in certain parts we can do things in the global fit already, but there are lots of things that are more advanced noise analyses that are still in the modeling form or the single source analysis form. Important needs here. You've heard a lot of these, I'm sure, if you're familiar with LISA conversations around this: glitches, gaps, non-stationary noise drift over time. These types of issues lead to non-diagonal noise covariance matrix, which can be very, very, very computationally consuming, and also to take into account time dependence and kind of the mixture with the stochastic sources and how to disambiguate those. And so these are, I'm not going to get into too much detail because there's just way too much to talk about here. I pointed to a few papers here that can kind of introduce you to some of the noise concepts and glitches and gaps and all that stuff. But this is a very active area of research. The LDC2B spritz is to concentrate on these kind of things. So this is definitely like a very active area. Given the limited time, I'm just going to go to the next part, and then I'll stop at the end for questions, because I really do want to talk about this. As I said in the beginning, one of the kind of main things that I'm thinking about and that I care about is that the LISA global fit, this thing that is going to be large, complex, managed and worked on by many, many different people. In order to do this and gain ourselves our maximal possible abilities and performance, we need to make this a massively open source, community driven, scalable operation. And that's something that I think I've spent some time thinking about. And I'm kind of come up with this picture, and I'm working on an initial implementation of this coming out of our initial algorithm. But the idea is what is shown here. And that is that for all of these pipelines that we will discuss and talk about, whether it's my pipeline or Stefan's pipeline or Tyson's or the French group or any pipelines that will come about, generally speaking, there are three main kind of types of operators inside this LISA global fit. There is an engine which runs the calculation. These are just words I've picked, just to be clear. An engine that runs and manages the whole calculation, takes in the inputs, sets everything up, keeps track of how long it's running, all those kind of things, doing all the calculations in between steps. That's what the engine does. Then you have what I'm calling the catalyst, which is, I took that term kind of, from thinking about catalyst, both, I guess, in its main definition, but also like in biology, where you kind of, the catalyst or enzyme or whatever attaches onto something and it creates a difference in the system. It causes the system to change. And so that's why I called this catalyst. So the idea here is with these two pieces, you have this engine that runs everything in this circle. It outputs the current state of everything to the catalyst. The catalyst then changes that state in some way. It does not matter specifically how it changes it. It just matters that its goal is to change it. It then outputs this new state back to the engine, and we start over with the kind of third piece here, what I'm just calling the recorder, which is, saving all the information to a file and optimizing all of that type of work. So the reason I'm thinking about it like this is because we are going to reuse a lot of this infrastructure. And really, the engine and the recorder don't have to be different for almost any of these algorithms. They can really be expanded and adapted to fit every single one of these algorithms. And that is what I'm working on. My goal here is to make it so that if you want to implement a global fit or work on this, you just have to work on the catalyst or one of the catalysts. And so this is where, we'll select at each step, are we going to change the massive black hole parameters? Are we going to change MREs, the galaxy, whatever. And so my hope here is to basically remove the onus of building a recorder, of building an engine, and just keeping it to what actually matters for our success in our science, which is this catalyst group and having options there. And just to say, if you're familiar at all with my sampling software, Aaron is already built to do this. So I am right now working on taking our global fit implementation and kind of resetting it up in this form, where we will use the Aaron backend objects that store things in HDF5 compressed files to do the recorder. We use the ensemble sampler to kind of run this engine. And then the moves that we use as proposals are effectively the ways that we change the group. And just to bring this all together and end here, because I know I'm right on the dot of the hour. This is my vision for where this is going. This is not a real code, but once again, my vision for this. You are a person at a university, maybe you're a postdoc, student, professor, and your group wants to work on a new way of analyzing the massive black holes in the global fit. Maybe you found this effect and you want to include it in a waveform or something like that. But in order to do the whole global fit, in order to get proper statistical results and everything, it will be necessary to, put these things into the global fit, at least at a minimum, at a final step, to run all of these things together. And because of how big and complex the global fit is, I foresee that being a huge barrier to entry to anyone who wants to work on a specific source or a specific module. And so my goal here is to produce something that will allow us to do what you see here, which is a Python code that illustrates how easy I want it to be. You will take the LISA analysis tools software package. You will import from it. Erebor is the name of our pipeline that I put together. You'll input an already complete pipeline, a few other things. You will then build this setup that you want. This is where you do the specific thing you want to do, is you make this special massive black hole binary setup. You can do whatever you want to this state. Once again, this is a catalyst here. So we're talking about this thing up here being a catalyst. You can change the parameters, do whatever you want, use whatever waveforms you want in here. And what you'll do then is you'll initialize the pipeline, remove our massive black hole module if you want to, add your massive black hole module, and run it. So that's where I want to go. I want this to be like you can use everything else that everyone else has done and sub in your piece. And hopefully the idea is, as a community, we develop these things. So you do this massive black hole move. You're like, wow, this worked really well. I really want the community to be able to use this. You can then contribute to the LISA analysis tools global fit pipelines library. You can have your citations with it, all of that stuff. And people can, import your module with the pipeline or sub in your module into their pipeline. So the idea here is, once again, going back to that word from one of the first slides, modularity. We want everything to be flexible, customizable, subbing in and out. That's the best way for us to achieve success in our mission and in our science. And with that, I will end and take questions. Thank you all for your time. I hope that was informative.
Yes, thank you. That was definitely very well received. Yes, I know we are already with 1 minute past the hour, but maybe we can take a few questions if you have any.
And I'm not in a hurry. I know some people might have to go, but if I'm not in a hurry, if people want to hang around and ask questions, I'm happy to do so.
So don't be shy.
So I have a question, maybe.
Yeah.
And it's more like not a technical question. It's about like the interactions. So like you said, now there are like 4 different pipelines being built for this
Yep.
robot. So, like, how is the idea of them to be completely independent so that we have a level of redundancy that then can give us more robust results, or is somehow there could be a point where they can interplay with each other to find the result? Sorry, it's not very clear to my question, but I hope.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. So I think there's two answers to that. There's one answer that's more on the kind of official side, and what I mean by that is on the NASA side, that's the NASA Science Ground Segment. On the ESA side, that's the DDPC. Both of those entities will have their own production level pipelines that will be built out of the pipelines that we're starting to build now, and those will be, I think, purposefully separate instances, implementations of two different pipelines that don't have any overlap and shouldn't really. We should have some, in terms of at least our very base level results. If we want to be confident on them, we need, at least two pipelines that are built differently to show us. I'm not going to say the same thing because I think, as we've been seeing already, it's not going to show us the same thing at every scale. Like the mass black holes may be better than some of the low signal galactic binaries, but ultimately we do need a bit of that redundancy, I think, to make sure that we're on track. Now, the second answer I have for that is much more mine of the LISA community, which is NASA and ESA. They want to produce these results, but they don't have the breadth and the width to do every single possible capability that we could ever ask for or need to do all the science and everything. We are going to build a pipeline that's going to do, as good as we possibly can, but we're not going to be someone who's like taking 10 different models for gas drag in Emery physics and applying them to our production global fits. That's probably not going to happen. So the way I really view this from a high level is, I really think, and that's the point of what I'm saying with these kind of slides here, is I don't think we need to separate these things, because really the differences here are all in the catalyst. The engine, nothing matters in the engine. It doesn't do any calculations, just bookkeeps. The recorder is just a bookkeeper. The catalyst is where everything happens. And so my view is that if we build an infrastructure that can handle the different catalysts that are coming out of these global fit algorithms, then we won't have to view them as separate algorithms. They're just separate options for different modules. You want to use Tyson-Littenberg's Galaxy module, and you want to use the like German group's Emery module, and you want to use something I've worked on for stellar origin black holes or something like that. I'm just saying random stuff here. The whole point of what I am envisioning here is you can mix and match every single piece. Like they'll all take some general set of inputs, and I'll take some general, and I'll give some general set of outputs, and you can work on the intricate details of the middle. But the idea is lowest barrier to entry, lowest barrier to sharing these modules, working with them. We want the community to have all of that flexibility. So I think at that level, I don't view these necessarily as separate. I view these as kind of test beds. And like, for example, one of the first things I'm going to do once I have this kind of working implementation of this diagram that I'm showing you, the first plan I have is to wrap Tyson's codes into this setup. And the reason for that is I don't want Tyson necessarily to have to write a code that is like for me specifically. I don't want him to have to take all of that time and whatnot. But I do want to make sure that this thing that I'm building can take what he has done, just put a thin wrapper around it, and run it with everything else just like it would anyways. And I'm fairly confident from looking at his codes and some of the other codes that are out there that we can do this. So I hope that answers your question, but I think that's how I view it. Is I think at like kind of the NASA ESA level, there's a little bit more specifics that will separate things, but my hope is at a larger level, we can actually avoid this. We just have to kind of all work towards this not always easy to do. We have to encourage people to share their codes, share their work, all that stuff. But the point is, I'm trying to work towards an infrastructure that will let us do that with minimal speed bumps along the way. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I just have a really small, or maybe it's not small, follow-up question about this. So I was wondering, I think it's a really cool vision. Like I can see the power of this. I was wondering if then one simple key point should be to use, for instance, the same, as you said, the same infrastructure. Like, so we would need a common base level to do this. For instance, like you actually showed in your example code, some kind of common classes to use. Is this something that is already happening? Like there is the idea to spread a common framework between also NASA and HES and so on, or is this again only just a vision?
So no. So the NASA ESA stuff is a little different because, and I know I like technically work for NASA and I work on the ground segment, and like we are going to have software engineers that implement a production pipeline that will be like the NASA production pipeline. I envision that the thing that I'm talking about here will actually allow the NASA pipeline pieces to plug into it, so that we can run the NASA pipeline within our infrastructure, but it won't be the same thing. So, but to be clear, I think on the like in the implementation that I have of the global fit that I've worked on, this process, this work is in progress. Like I do have it set up exactly like this. I'm just kind of streamlining it, cleaning it up, and kind of building it a little bit more strictly into this image. But this is something that I would say is already happening at some level. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Maho?
Hey, thanks for the overview, Michael. That was very enlightening actually for me as well. I wondered, how does the joint likelihood fit in this whole wheel of these modules?
That's a good question. So the likelihood is, I don't want to make sure I will try not to butcher the math terms, but the likelihood is effectively a scalar function, right? Like you're putting in it's effectively like a massive sum, a discretized sum that gives you a single value for the likelihood. And that single value for the likelihood represents your current point in parameter space, in whatever parameter space you're in. So if we are in the middle of our global fit and we have 10,000 binaries and we have 15 massive black holes and 100 MREs and so on and so forth, like one instance of the parameters for all of the sources put together, you need one instance of that for all sources to calculate your one scalar likelihood value. And so when you have this, yeah.
Sorry, I meant, I should have been more explicit. Joint EM gravitational wave likelihood.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. All right. That's a good question. So I think that's something that I'm thinking a little bit about. I've been talking a bit about that with some folks at Minnesota. I think this is a important area of need in the LESA research. I think I put in that for the galaxy and whatnot, that it's we have EM interaction and whatnot. But I think it would definitely help the global fit to have a joint likelihood that is based on some type of EM observations. Obviously, you have to, apply some statistical framework to EM observations, and I'm not as familiar with that because I don't work on the EM side. But this is definitely something, a joint likelihood between them, I see being very useful, something that would be very important, and something that will just allow us to maintain a really good statistical consistency as we get EM observations of our gravitational wave sources, so we don't have to kind of go back and forth on them, like, assuming things in one and using that in the other or something like that. I think if we can create an EM likelihood that for like the same, if we know that a gravitational wave source, right, if we see something in the EM we know it's in the gravitational waves. So we know that it's there. We don't have to use something like reversible jump or transdimensional sampling to decide if it's there. We know it's there. But as of what we do right now in like Tyson's pipeline is we assume a delta function for the frequency of the gravitational wave, the sky location of the gravitational wave, because that comes from the EM information, which generally speaking, those things are probably extremely constraining on the frequency and the sky location and all of that stuff. But I do think that we should work in kind of a full model if we can for those sources that includes the likelihood, so that as we sample over any parameters that may not be as well known, like the inclination or something like that, we are taking the gravitational wave and the EM information into account in that single likelihood function. Does that answer your question? Or that's just my opinion on it being useful?
Oh, yeah, I think.
To be clear, I don't really have an initial idea of like what the EM likelihood function looks like, right? But as long as it's a statistically normalizable function or whatever, you can. It's independent of the gravitational wave observation, so you can just add the likelihoods. You just have to actually determine what the likelihood of the EM observation would be. But right. if you come up with that, the idea is like it should weight your information properly, right? Like in gravitational waves, if you have a 1,000 SNR galactic binary, your peaks are going to be very, very, very constrained, and maybe your EM likelihood will help them a little bit. Maybe it won't help them at all.
Yeah.
Maybe you'll have an SNR 20 source, that's like the fact that you have the EM counterpart and the likelihood information that gets you the kind of correct information of the inclination in there might be really helpful in, disambiguating things. So, right. Definitely some interesting work there. Yeah.
I was wondering, because de facto you are probably putting some of this information somehow in your likelihood by like in the context, for instance, of the galactic binaries, just the location, of highest probability, and also in the context of I guess supermassive black hole binaries, we know we're only sensitive to a certain kind at a certain distance, or they have to be at the center of galaxies, we know. So I was curious if that's fed in, I guess, right now, or is that not even?
No, definitely not in there. Okay. Definitely not in there now, but I think, it's, I don't want to say it's on the horizon, because I think that specific thing is in that kind of single source analysis step, maybe even still the data analysis waveform step. Like we don't actually have a model yet that we're confident in and can use. So, yeah, I think but I do think once we develop get through the single source side of it on the EM side, I think it will plug in fairly easily to the gravitational wave side, or into what we already have. It's just we need to do the build up first.
One other question I had was not super related, but in terms of, for instance, say that we never get the Emery waveforms, right? I don't know, or there's too much astrophysical effects or whatnot, something burst search, but obviously not bursty, because a lot of these things are going to be long lived, is also going to be part of this whole engine, right?
Yes. So yeah, burst sources are definitely there. I didn't talk about them because I kind of think about them somewhat of a way as glitches. They're not glitches, but they're very similar to how we treat glitches.
But they would be longer lived, right? A lot of them.
Bursts, I'm not sure about that. I guess it depends on what you categorize as a burst and what is astrophysically possible. Because I think what I've seen in terms of bursts, it's actually pretty similar to what we think about as in terms of glitches. They're pretty short lived and but can be loud.
But for instance, in the case of an unmodeled accretion from an Emery or whatnot, if we don't understand the waveform well, but it is a long-lived long-lived source, then that would be equivalent of a base wave, right? For LIGO, something like that, where you have
and I think that's, for example, one of the things I think about when I kind of state the generality of having to examine how these different sources interact. It's exactly that kind of thing. Like if you take a glitch, a simplified model or a burst model, there's a chance that you can actually build up a ton of those into, latching onto a gravitational wave signal that you haven't fit properly, right? Like if you take an Emory waveform and you detect an Emory waveform that's signal to noise ratio 100, but you lock onto it and you can actually only maximize your SNR of extraction at like 80 or something because of some mismatches in the waveform, then you do have a lot of residual left in there that can be latched onto with other things. So that is a major concern, I would say. Is making sure that we have these waveforms right, and that if they aren't right, that we could hopefully recognize that, like, we have a bunch of superfluous bursts or something in this region, and it's like, oh, okay, clearly maybe there's a waveform issue or something, but we are very far from that point, I would say, of being able to tell that.
Okay. Yeah, nice. So in the case of stochastic, or I guess in the case of something like a continuous, like a burst search, but more continuous, there isn't something properly implemented. That's what I'm understanding.
Well, so definitely not anything that's bursty, but in any type of like long-lived, unmodeled source, I guess.
Yes.
You're basically looking at a galactic binary signal, right? Like it's a sine wave with f dot in it, So, right, like a long-lived sine wave will just be a galactic binary signal with no f dot. So, really, the galactic binary signal is a quasi-stationary signal. Like that's really what it is. It just happens to be that galactic binaries are represented well by a quasi-stationary signal.
Okay. So it's not necessarily just a sine wave or something close to a sine wave with some evolution. That search will encompass a larger set of continuous things.
Wait, sorry. I misunderstood, but I think what I was saying is the like anything that has in its nature is a sine wave plus a small derivative or something like that. The galactic binary waveform should find it.
Okay.
It has to be a small second derivative, and it has to be a fairly consistent or very small second. Like if it's a second, or sorry, the first derivative has to be small. If it gets too large, the galactic binary signal won't do well at it. But it also has to be kind of constant, or at least its scale over which it oscillates has to be small compared to the range that the galactic binary waveform can handle. But anything that is a located phase profile, for example, I think of things like, I think from some of the dynamics groups that have the highly eccentric binaries, highly eccentric binaries, like even have eccentricities, like I think in like the 0.99 range. Those signals are difficult to generate. That's going to be something that we're going to have to design a template for specifically. We're not going to be able to use a burst signal or anything to find that, I don't think, because it's there's too much particular phase evolution, right? So those are the two ends of the spectrum, I guess, right? Is that as you get to the simpler side, we can probably use the waveforms we have or some basis of the waveforms we have to fit it. But as it gets complex, and that's not true anymore.
Okay. So something like a waveform agnostic search, but not limited in time, like a burst, is not really feasible right now. That's my question, I guess.
I'm not sure. So I think in the end, you'd basically be, when you think about the LECSTA data, right, just so much in it. Like, are you talking about a burst search on top of a subtracted residual? Because in that case, maybe. Like if you're like, I think I found all the mass black holes, and I think I found all the Emorys, and I found all the galactic binaries, whatever, and like I still have something that I haven't found in there. I'm going to run a search on it on the residual data and see if I find anything. I think like that kind of thing, is very reasonable.
Okay.
But like I think in terms of like a full sense of inside the global fit, that would be a bit harder, a bit more complex, definitely.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, like
sorry to
yeah. No, it's okay. I mean, I think it would be, not very informative to do like a search like that on the unsubtracted data, right? You're just going to come back
Right.
with like
No, of course.
what of matches against galactic binaries and, not going to tell you anything. But once you get to the residual, or at least your current best fit residual, then, I think that's a possibility.
Okay. Cool.
Any other questions?
I have a quick question. If you're not in a rush, Michael, thank you.
Yep.
So, something that I missed in terms of global fit, are we doing stuff hierarchically? I mean, if you're fitting the supermassive binaries, then for the next source, you're just going dealing with the residual data, or is it happening at the same time?
So once you reach, in MCMC terms, like a steady state, once you reach a statistical equilibrium where you are technically sampling the posterior distribution, what you'll be operating on is residuals as you pass them around. You'll go into the Emory module and you'll do an Emory proposal, and what you'll do is you'll take the residual, you'll put your Emory waveform back into the residual, so it's no longer subtracted. Like you basically put the model that you have subtracted out, you put it back in. Then you'll update the Emory parameters. You'll do however you do that through sampling. And then when you finish with that step, you will then subtract the new waveform out of the residual and then pass that residual on to the next source. So once you've reached a steady state, you really are passing a residual. You're putting things back into it, sampling, and then pulling out the new thing. And as long as you Gibbs sample and you treat everything properly, this is all fine and statistically consistent. Before you reach the steady state, it's a little more complicated. Technically, as I said earlier, you could set this whole thing up and you could let the MCMC run and it will give you the right answer, but you would have to run it for an infinite amount of time. Sure. So the way that we sidestep that, because at some level you have to run the global fit for some time. There's a minimum amount of time that's going to give you a statistically consistent set of results. And what that means is you have to run for that amount of time when you're near the maximum likelihood point, when you have burned in your samples, when you are actually sampling the posterior distribution. But to get there is not easy, and you have to be a little careful. This is like the issue that I was talking about when I had a minus sign in the wrong place for a massive black hole, and I fit like 1,000 galactic binaries against that massive black hole waveform. It's these kind of things that you have to think about when it comes to the start. So like if you haven't yet subtracted your massive black holes, you're going to have an issue when you start fitting the galaxy, because the galaxy is going to latch on to extra massive black hole signal that's not subtracted yet. And then once you're there, it may take an infinite amount of time for the MCMC to move itself out of that state. Okay. So the result of that is all of the beginning steps that get you to a steady state are incredibly important and incredibly sensitive. You have to be careful with kind of the order you do things in. And you also have to be careful that the order you do things in doesn't affect the final result. It shouldn't. Well, okay, I should say it like this. Obviously, if it's getting it wrong, it's going to affect the final result. But if you have an initial setup that gives you what you think is the right result, you have to verify that goes through with all of the other sources and anything else you'll have to worry about. So it is nuanced and sensitive in the pre-steady state part of this analysis. And that's something I'm very worried about, like in terms of like looking for glitches and bursts and galactic binaries. We're kind of going to need to have subtracted out pretty much everything else out or else I worry it'll latch on to too many other things that we don't want it to. So that kind of thing is a concern.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I was thinking, so yeah, based on what you said, then if someone wants to study, for example, systematics in modeling these kind of sources, the first step, or if you want to prioritize these things, is to go to massive black holes, I think, right? Because if you have some systematics there, that's going to affect any inference that we are going to do on all the next sources, next layer sources, if I'm not wrong.
So I think your statement is correct in my opinion, with one small caveat, which is like it might be hard to get a massive black hole to fit a galactic binary that we haven't subtracted, or a massive black hole to fit an emery, or an emery to fit a galactic binary, right? Like it's not necessarily a two-way street where it's like you can mistake them for each other, but as you simplify your model, right, galactic binary is really just a position in the sky, and coming from a position in the sky is a modulated sine wave, you know. The the glitches, those kind of things, we build them out of generally simpler basis functions. Anytime we do that, it brings in the potential mismatch or misuse of one of those templates in the wrong place, because they're so simple that they can latch onto a little bit of SNR when you have like a quasi-stationary sine wave over the period of like a minute or something. Who knows? It'll just latch on for SNR 2 or 3, and it will be put in there. So it's this is definitely something of concern, something we need to look at. That's why I separate out those like steps where we have a module that's for a specific source type and a full global fit. Those are two very different steps. If you can't solve the first one, you won't solve the second one. But solving the first one doesn't mean that you have solved the second one.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Any other questions? For anyone who's still around, I'll try to share these slides so that the clickable links are usable. The whole point of this is like a bookkeeping of a good place to start for everybody and how to know what's going on. So I'll send it around, and Florentina, I'll also fill out that Google Doc that Albin sent me. Just FYI.
And also thank you so much for this beautiful presentation and for staying over time to have this very, very nice discussion with whoever had questions. I think this was very useful and a very nice session of the LECSTalks.
Okay, good.
Thank you, and thank you everyone who joined. Are there any more questions or comments or?
A quick question or comment. So, the time for the next meetings, is it going to be close to North American timeline? I mean, time zone, or because I think the previous one, which was Francisco, it was very only Europe friendly time, right?
The last one was during the European morning, so I'm not sure. I have to check the schedule to check with Albin what is the time for the next one. But when we send the record for this meeting and the slides from Michael, we will also send you this information so that you know how to set your schedule. And of course, if you are interested in presenting your research in the next LECSTalks, please let us know.
Yeah, thank you. Sure.
Well, if there are no other questions, then I would like to thank everyone for joining today and to thank Michael again for this very, very nice presentation, and to wish you all a wonderful rest of the day, and we'll talk to you soon.